By late afternoon, he was shaking so violently with fever that his teeth rattled. His attendants stoked the fire in the can and piled blankets on him, but nothing helped. They discussed the possibility of carrying him through the night to the hospital in Wapen, but the distance was too great, and they feared that he would not survive the journey. All they could do was apply cold compresses in a futile effort to reduce his suffering. In the evening, Dr. Lin Jinliang reached Wangshiko. Bethune was barely conscious as Lin began to examine him, while listening to Chen Shihhua's anguished account of his attempt to persuade Bethune to undergo an amputation of his finger. Lin quickly confirmed what the other doctors must have already known. The infection was now so far advanced that Bethune's arm had to be amputated. But Bethune roused enough to refuse. The best Lin Jinliang could do under the circumstances was to cross-cut the abscess inside his left elbow to release the pus and clean the affected area. He and Chen Shihua performed the procedure without resistance from Bethune, who had again become semi-conscious. Gradually, he began to shake less, and finally he drifted off to sleep for several hours. When he woke early on Saturday morning, he was no longer shaking and seemed more clear-headed. When he said that he felt better, Dee's wife suggested he try to eat a persimmon. Cutting up one of the round orange-yellow fruits, she spooned the syrupy pieces into his mouth. When he asked for more, she sliced another, and he managed to eat some of that too. By the early afternoon, Hudsa Shin made some coffee, and Bethune drank a little of it. He then said that he wanted to write some letters, so his comrades propped him against a wooden backrest and set a small table in front of him, placing on it a paper and pencil. Bethune asked to be left alone. A few minutes after 4 p.m., one of his attendants opened the door to look in at him. Bethune had lapsed into unconsciousness, his head drooping on his chest. Pieces of paper lay scattered about on the floor. On the can, they found a note to Lang Lin, which read, "I came back from the front yesterday. There was no good in my being there. I couldn't get out of bed or operate. I feel freely today, pain over heart. We'll see you tomorrow, I expect." But Bethune must have known that he would not see Lang Lin again, that the rough rafters above the can and the pale light filtering through the small rice-papered window were his last glimpse of the world. For the first 2 sentences of the unfinished second letter, which was addressed to his general, Ni Rongzhen, were, "I am fatally ill. I am going to die." During the early evening, between brief periods of restless sleep and delirium, he had moments of partial clarity when he struggled to tell Pan Fan what he wanted to include in his letter to General Ni. Before sinking into unconsciousness, he asked the interpreter to accept his watch as a gift. Throughout the night and into Sunday morning, Lin Jinliang, Chen Shihua, Pan Fan, and the faithful Hudsa Shin stood by the can, taking turns, placing cold compresses on his forehead. In the early hours of the morning, Bethune slept fitfully, rousing to ask for news of his mobile unit and trying to give orders to those who stood helplessly by. Shortly after 5 a.m., he coughed and moved his lips in a vain effort to speak. Then his breathing slowed perceptibly, and at last it stopped. Lin Jinliang checked his pulse and began to weep. Pan Fan glanced at Bethune's watch. The time was 20 minutes past 5. Hearing that a Japanese force was moving toward Wangshiko, and reluctant to bury Bethune without official permission, the medical team readied themselves to leave the village by mid-morning. Dr. Lin Jinliang was entrusted with transporting the body, and under his supervision it was placed on a stretcher carried by 6 men. Then the small group set out for the village of Ujajai. The narrow trails they followed twisted so much that the stretcher sometimes overturned, pitching the body to the ground. So Lin, who was mounted, for a time carried it before him on his horse. Hoping to prevent the news of Bethune's death from spreading, they concealed his identity by covering his body with a green army coat. In the late afternoon, they reached the hamlet of Mulan, where one of the villagers allowed them to move the body into his cellar until the following morning. After a grueling 2-day trek along icy trails through the hills, the party reached Ujajai on Wednesday. There they washed the body, clothed it in an army uniform, and wrapped it in red cloth. On Friday, the 17th of November, after a ceremony attended by the few local officials and most of the villagers, they took Bethune's remains to a desolate field at the base of a lonely ridge known as Wolf Mountain Valley Gate. There they dug his grave, and the Chinese earth received his body. Years before, Bethune had written to Marion Scott, a woman he loved, "You need an altar to immolate yourself upon, a glad, burning sacrifice to a living God. You ask to be consumed, to rise again like a phoenix from the ashes of your own glad destruction, clean and pure and free, with wings." In China, Bethune had found that altar and made that sacrifice.